Hello and good evening. And literally, people do ask anything about buying or renting property in Portugal tonight. We've got a fantastic guest with us. That's Pieter Van Nuenen of the Portugal Company. Now, Peter, it's been a while. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Carl. Thank you for having me again. And yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, very well. Good to see you in traditional Dutch orange, I think, tonight.
Yes, it's no, it doesn't have any specific reason, but indeed, it's thanks for the reminder. It's a
It
long
suits
time.
you. It suits you. And we were listening to a little bit of Crosby, Stills and Nash there in our house, which was, for me, was to conjure up this image of you in your country home in Castelo Branco, Pedroga Grande, in fact. But you're not there this evening. I think you're in another part of Lisbon tonight. Dare you say where?
Yeah, there. It's I'm in Alcochete. It's a very lovely, authentic fishing village just south of the Tagus River, just south of Lisbon. If you cross this long bridge, the Vasco da Gama Bridge, it's about 18 kilometers long. Then you end up here at the coast, at the south coast of this lovely fishing village. So that's
Okay.
where I am today.
I think we might come back to that. So that may well be a bit of a tip, Alcochete as a place to look at. And
Definitely, definitely.
yes, so ask anything about buying or renting property in Portugal. Peter is the man to tackle those questions. Good evening to you, Eric, Denise, Lynn, Jean, Matty's here as well. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Monica, Ray, greetings from British Columbia, Arizona, Cascais, of course. Hello, Anna, and from Pombal, where Matty is. So questions will be coming in from all over the world tonight for you. Tell us a bit about yourself, if you will, first, though, Peter, so we can set the scene and get a bit of context. The Portugal Company, what do you do?
Okay, what we do, we are in a very short summary, we are buyers advocates. So we support foreigners that decided to move to Portugal with buying property. It can be a second home for holidays, or it can be a new family home if they decided to move with the entire family to live here in Portugal. So we try to be involved in this buying process in a very early stage to really sit down with them to define where they want to live. Also handling a lot of the bureaucracy in terms of the visas, all that kind of things. We also can step in to help supporting them to arrange a mortgage via a Portuguese bank. But always not in the middle of the street, but in the middle of our service is the buying process of property. That's what we do, and we work in the entire country. Portugal is a very small country geographically, but believe me, we can make thousands of kilometers or miles just to explore everything, and always discovering new places, new locations, new kind of hidden gems.
Fantastic. Excellent. And it's been a few months since we've spoken. How are things? I mean, the popularity of Portugal around the world is showing no sign of letting up. I think there are more and more people interested coming from America. How's that looking for you at the moment?
Yeah, I think indeed the spotlight is still on Portugal. I mean, there is a lot of demand from Americans, but also people from Australia, from the UK or other Northern European countries. But to be honest, the increase of demand from the USA is really big, and I think the last 6 or even 12 months are really showing a lot of demand from the US and also other countries, as I said.
Brilliant. Okay, so looking good, and we'll start with some more general questions, and then we'll focus them down. And also, if you prefer to ask your question off air, as it were, we can do that after the recording stops tonight. We're big fans of the base camp idea, renting a property to then come and live in Portugal for a little while in your rental, which might be part of your D7, of course, and then buying later. Would you advocate that approach? And if so, how would you recommend people go about that?
Yeah, I think that's a very wise approach because, well, if you know, for example, where you want to live, because you have traveled to Portugal already regularly and you really know where your new home wants to be or has to be, then you don't need to rent, of course. But a lot of people maybe have been here for a long weekend or maybe 10 days or so. And then it's really wise to first land indeed, set up a base camp somewhere in a rental property. And then, do your homework, really explore the country. And as I said, Portugal is small, but it has a lot of varieties in terms of culture, nature, regions, cities. So yeah, I think it's a very good idea. And it's for a lot of people, it kind of ticks two boxes, right? If you need a D7, one of the requirements is a lease agreement. So in that sense, it really helps that as well.
Okay, so it would appear you agree with the base camp idea, but it's not that easy, is it, getting a rental? What's your view on that at the moment?
It's getting it's getting more complicated to get a good rental agreement, and of course, it's also not getting less expensive. It's really especially in the region of Lisbon, in the city center, or also a bit outside of Lisbon. Lease prices are really increasing, and we see a lot of people asking. Well, I'm not saying ridiculous prices, because the market is having the last words, of course. But yeah, sometimes it's really too much. Let's be honest. And they also ask then a couple of ridiculous. I think it's really ridiculous. Criteria in terms of down payment and stuff like that.
And that's challengeable, because we might go into some of the specifics with that. I mean, people are hearing horror stories, aren't they, of cheeky landlords, let's call them that for the time being, who say, well, you're going to have to pay us a whole year up front. Is this the sort of thing you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm pointing at. I mean, people are asking sometimes, is that illegal? Well, in a sense, it's not. If a landlord and a tenant both decide to sign a contract, which states that you have to pay 12 months upfront, then from a legal perspective, it's legal, but it's not normal. I think 3 months, maybe 4, but that's really it. I really wouldn't pay more for that.
And that's the beauty, of course, of working with someone like yourself as a buyer's agent. An individual doing that who knows nothing of the way the land lies here might be tempted to, out of desperation, to pay that whole year. Whereas you've got a bit of experience, you live here, you're used to dealing with these situations, you can push back on the client's behalf. Yeah,
sure. I think that's really the added value. Also, not only checking the payments, but also the entire contract. We do that all the time with a lawyer. It's not a big deal. I mean, normally it's just a standard contract with a couple of clauses. We always want to have it in Portuguese and English or another second language, but it should be bilingual, so people really understand what they are paying for, what they are signing for. So that's really some of the basics when it comes to rentals.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Great question in from Jay. Thank you for that. And from Matty too. How necessary? Let's get into some specifics then. And please feel free to put your questions. Anything about renting or buying here in Portugal. Anything at all. No silly questions here tonight. And it's me asking them anyway, so I can take the blame for that. How necessary is it to buy a property that already has a habitation license? I heard it's possible to get the license after buying as well. How difficult would that be, and what to look out for in the process? I mean, what is that in the first place? What some buildings are licensed for habitation, some aren't. What's the background on that, Pieter, first of all?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's very specific for Portuguese real estate. So imagine you can buy a brand new apartment or a brand new villa in whatever city or village in Portugal. It's completely new, but the town hall didn't issue yet a license to habitate the house in this example, which on paper might be a problem because you then can't go to the notary to sign a final deed, because one of the requirements, of course, is to have this license and you have to show it up front. Also, you can't get a finance with a Portuguese bank. And if you talk to most of the developers, they say, okay, but this issue or this license will be issued in a couple of weeks. And yeah, it's just a matter of waiting a bit and then you will get it. That's true. But sometimes, to be very honest, this couple of weeks turn into a couple of months or whatsoever. So it's not just the camera or the town hall in English that doesn't want to issue it, but it's a backlog of bureaucracy and work and so on, especially in bigger cities like Lisbon and Porto, where there's a lot of demand, where there's a lot of new build. Yeah, it can take a couple of months. So that's definitely something to take into account.
So if you can wait, it might be worth it. But if you're in a hurry, that could be quite a blockage, especially let's say you're looking for your habitation license in the last few weeks of July of the year. You might have an almighty wait ahead of you as it goes into summer, for example.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll come back to which are your favorite cameras to work with, because that's some very good inside information, I think. Some of your favorites and possibly the not so favorite, a top 10 maybe, that we could work on of the cameras around the country that you like working with. Great question from Jay. Others might be thinking of this strategy. Found an apartment we like, and it's all about timing here. What are the expected landmines, metaphorically, if we buy now and then rent out long term for 1 to 2 years and then convert the property to our Portuguese residents? Now that sounds like a pretty smart strategy, doesn't it? You won't have an empty property waiting for you. You'll be exploiting your asset there, and you'll have an asset that you can show for your D7 purposes. How would that go in reality, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a very smart solution indeed. It already gets you a return on investment, and yeah, with the increasing demand, like we just discussed for long-term rentals, it's very smart. I don't see a lot of landmines. The only thing is you really have to focus on long-term rentals, not short-term rentals, because that's something. The market for short-term rentals, especially in the cities, is completely different from let's say 6 or 12 months ago. So if you have that idea, really focus on long-term rentals. No other landmines, I think. Yeah, of course, the normal issues that you can have with renting out property, but I think also there you need to set up a decent legal agreement between yourself and the tenant. But I mean, other than that, I don't see a lot of issues.
You might even be able to rent it out to another D7 person. How about that? Or 2 in succession there.
I think that's a market in itself.
Super smart. Okay.
Let's ask.
All right, Jay. Yeah, let's talk after.
Yeah.
Let's talk after the show. That's fantastic. Good strategy there. I think a lot of other people will go, that sounds pretty good. Either as the person doing it or the person wanting to have a D7 lease like that. A question there from Lynn. Thanks, Lynn. Is it possible to buy an apartment in northern Portugal? We're talking about how the property prices have been going up, of course, recently. But is it still possible to buy something in northern Portugal? Well, for other people, for anywhere else, for that matter, in Portugal, for less than 100,000 still.
Yes and no. Well, it really depends on what you're looking for, but I think there are still some little villages, and I'm not saying very small villages that are completely isolated, but I mean, don't look, of course, at Porto or at Vila Nova de Gaia. There, it's really hard to get yourself an apartment for 100K. But if you go a bit up north to Barcelos, to Viana do Castelo, well, I think there is still something available. But it's really, I think you better try to find something around 200K.
Okay, there you go, Lynn.
More realistic.
Yes. All right. Thanks for that, Peter. Charlotte, two questions, re-rentals then. Will I need to show a 1-year lease agreement when I renew my temporary residence like I did when I got the D7? Do you know the answer to that, first of all?
Don't know. No, I don't know that detail. I don't think so, but that's not just an answer, right? I don't know.
All right. I suggest you tune in on a Monday to put that to Gilda on the breakfast show on a Monday, Charlotte. And part two of that question, can a landlord raise the rent by €200 from 1 year to the next? I thought there were restrictions on that. Good question, Charlotte. And I'm going to roll that up with another question that came in about squatters' rights. Now, this is looking at it from both sides, isn't it? We've got the tenant there worried about a rent hike, and we've got somebody else worried about squatting, probably and maybe because they're outside of the country. How is the law working? I mean, we often see that it's very favorable for the tenant. How difficult might that be? Does that stop the €200 rent hike? And is that a bit worrying for somebody concerned about squatters' rights who's not even in the country but might own a property here?
Yeah, I think it depends, of course, of what the initial rent is. If it was, let's say, 2,000, and then it will be 10% up, which is, of course, a huge increasement. But if it's from 600 to 800, that's a no-go. I mean, I think it's a liberal market, so it's hard to fight it at a judge, and of course you need to hire a lawyer, which will also set you back more than 200 euros,
Yeah.
not a month. But so yeah, maybe it's something that you really need to discuss with the landlord and see where it comes from. I mean, it can be an increase in the services, the water, the electricity, or internet, but 200 euros a month. It's let's be honest, it's a big increase.
And is that for instance, Charlotte, that you're talking about there? Maybe we need a bit more background on that and a particular situation that you might be up against. Squatters' rights then, Peter, how to avoid this happening? People concerned, obviously, if they're buying a property from abroad and there it is, and they're not in the country to oversee it, they're not in it. How could that happen, and how can you safeguard against it?
Yeah, I think also there you really need to work on a good legal agreement, which for, let's say, a minimum period of 12 months is valid. Also stating what the potential increase in rent or in the services, as I just mentioned, can be. So then at least you have a bit of a guarantee from both sides, right? Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's something you really need to do.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I mean, certainly if we need to know more on that, Pedro and Charlotte, do let us know. And you had another question. I didn't know what that acronym was, though, so we'll come back to that. HOA, if you could elaborate on that, Pedro, that would be really good. In the UK, this is an interesting question from Michael. In the UK and other countries, a lot of people can rent a single room in somebody's house cheaply, as in lodgers, taking a room, having roommates. How do we do that in Portugal, but need a contract to show the address to the SEF? It's for a friend, asking for a friend there. Now, this has become a less attractive proposition, I think, to SEF, hasn't it? That they were concerned about people just saying, yeah, I'm staying with my mate. I think that's got a bit tougher, hasn't it, Peter, in recent time?
Yeah, definitely. And also one of the main requirements is a lease agreement. It's not just an agreement between people that know each other online or whatsoever. It really needs to be a legal agreement. So this option, it still sometimes works, and people can get away with it at the SEF for their D7 interviews. But no, I think you really need to focus and let's get that really clear. It's a 12-month agreement of a rental property, being an apartment, a studio. It doesn't have to be a big one with a very big rental price, I mean, but it should be an individual property.
Yeah, okay. And in relation to the atestado, which is the piece of paper that you sometimes need to sign to show to SEF to show that you're resident, I did hear of a situation only last week, of some people who've rented an apartment in Nazaré, there you would think that they could get an attestado for SEF purposes from their landlord who rented them the property, which is what's being asked for. And the landlord doesn't live in the same camera, so he's not allowed to do that, even though he's the renter of the property. And this might be a little bit of pernicketiness from a particular bureaucrat, but be aware of that you sometimes need two witnesses for the attestado, and that might be the new friends you make, even in the local cafe, but you might be up against something like that. Have you heard of such a situation, Peter?
No, not yet. I think if you go to in this example to the town hall of Nazareth, but yeah, you really need to check this with a lawyer that specialized in these 7 requirements.
And this does sometimes come down to particular individuals inside government offices being a bit fussy, right? It might not be the law; it might be just what they feel like saying on that day. This does happen, right?
Yeah, definitely. The law is one in Portugal, but the interpretation of it is a different story.
Yes.
And there, I mean, if you go, and I'm not aiming to have this top 10 of favorable,
Okay.
my favorite cameras or town halls, but our experience is if you go into the bigger cities, call it Porto, Coimbra, and Lisbon. There is a lot of details and scrutiny on it. Whereas if you go a bit more inland into the smaller villages, I'm not saying it's all more easy, but well, maybe that's what I'm saying. I think it's more easy to get it all done and all these documentation in smaller town halls, a bit more inland, rather than in the main cities of Portugal.
I think you're right. It's certainly my experience, and it's less intense, isn't it? And people know each other, which really helps. I think sometimes when people don't know each other and they're dealing with foreigners, it can be a bit defensive. Yeah. Whereas if you go with your landlord or somebody from the country who may well know the people inside the camera, that really helps. It goes a long way, doesn't it?
Yeah, and imagine if you then are missing one of the documents, then they are open to wait a bit or to guide you through the process. Whereas if you coming in Lisbon, you're just a number, a Xenia, and then you can go back to a lawyer, wait for a couple of weeks maybe, and then try it again.
Yeah,
it's more complicated, definitely.
All right. I have seen a lot of condominiums, says Pedro, but never anything about the HOAs. We think this might be the housing associations or the what is it? The group of people that oversee the running of the block. How problematic can this be, Peter, in your experience?
Well, it all depends on the people themselves, right? I mean, I don't see it's problematic. First of all, if you compare the monthly contribution with the contributions in Northern Europe or in the US, the fees are way lower, which is nice. But it's, of course, it doesn't have to do nothing with other issues. Sometimes these homeowners associations are run by a professional company, which is hired by this association. Sometimes not. People try to save some money, and they appoint a president between the neighbors, who for this running year then is in the lead. Most of the times with an assistant who takes care of for the financial part, for example. Mm-hmm. It's definitely something you need to look into in the buying process. Imagine you're buying a big or an apartment in a big building in Lisbon. You definitely need to look into the maintenance. If the financial situation of this homeowners association is healthy or not. And there it can be problematic. As bigger the association is and as longer it exists, well, I'm not saying it's always the case, but then believe me, you can run into some financial issues, and you then at the next meeting of this association are making a plea to renovate the elevator or to paint the exterior. But if your neighbors are not with you, then then it can be problematic.
Yeah. Okay. And that's, I think, as you opened up on that particular answer, that's more about people, isn't it, than Portugal, wherever they are in the world and how they operate in these situations. Pedro's actual question was, how expensive can it be? And I think you made a reference to there to, in many ways, it's better value than people might be used to in North America, for example.
Yeah, definitely. But also there is a bit there can be this issue. I mean, if it's always wise to pay a little bit more than necessary to build a bit of a reserve fund or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it really depends on the people on the board of this association. Yeah, and it can be problematic, but that's what I'm saying. You really need to look into it in a very early stage of the buying process. That's really wise.
And presumably the association would open themselves to you as a prospective buyer. You could ask them questions about how they manage the property.
Yeah, I think what we normally do is reach out to because in every building it's the association is it's an obligation to announce who the president is and who is running the financial department of the association. So it's really easy to reach out to those people. And of course, if in the first meeting as a potential buyer, they won't tell you everything, but well, it at least gives you a good insight.
Okay, and something people might want to be aware of that I've heard of, and I'd like you to verify or otherwise, is recently some of the Airbnb owners inside a condominium have been asked to pay a little bit more than some of the others as a way of managing this sort of political situation with Airbnb. There's more wear and tear, isn't there, if you're an Airbnb owner? So it might be right that you pay a little bit more when it comes to the fees. Have you heard this as well?
No, not yet, to be honest. What we have heard is that there are some new legislation in Portugal about running Airbnb or short-term rental in general. So that's definitely something you need to know in an early stage. Because imagine if your idea is to buy a property in Lisbon right now and to get return on investment from rentals for 3 years and then move to it yourself. You better know these things up front. If it's still possible to rent out short term, or that you really need to go for the longer term rentals.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that, Peter. Let's go to financing and mortgages now. Thank you, Layla, for this question. Still working with the pit bull, Peter?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, good. All right, excellent.
Yeah.
There appears to, well, if you don't know what we're referencing there, Peter will reveal all in just a moment. An excellent colleague who's very good at answering your question in terms of getting the finance, Layla. There appears to be little communication and or transparency around the financing. We've been told that inspection contingencies are not common. Appraisal contingencies are not common. Is that the same thing? Or accepted in structuring an offer. We found the house that we hope to purchase in Braga, but we're told if we wanted to proceed, we would have to make a large non-refundable payment to the sellers in order to come to terms, and that we would not be able to have a financing contingency or contingency around visa approval. This is quite complicated. Even if financing the purchase. In other words, if for some reason we're unable to procure a mortgage and cannot perform as cash buyers, we will lose the 100,000 deposit. It's hard to know if we're being advised with our best interests in mind, as it feels like as buyers, our interests are not well protected. It doesn't sound like it, does it, for Layla there, Peter?
No, I think, I mean, what we see is a down payment of 10%. Sometimes when the final deed is postponed for whatever reason to get, for example, this license of habitation that we just discussed, or a mortgage, then the developer or the current owner can insist of paying a bit more. 20% is something that already is very common in the market. We also have heard 30-40%, but no, it's not common. It's really, let's say 20% max is something we really work with. Okay. And yeah, also there is a standard contract, and of course you can add or change a bit to the clauses when it comes to legal requirements from both sides, of course, also as a buyer. but it's not like that. It's yeah. I don't know exactly this example from the people trying to buy in Braga, but I mean, for me, it sounds like a no-go. If you are not able to get your down payment of 100,000 euros, which is a serious amount of money, I don't know, of course, if it's 10% or 20 or even more or less, but let's have it very straight here. It's a lot of money,
Yes.
and you have to get it back if one of the if the other party, in this case the seller party, doesn't get to his terms.
This might be the promissory note. I think that's what you're alluding to there, isn't it? With the buyer's side on the promissory note, what would they stand to lose ordinarily? Is it 10%?
Normally it's 10%. Yeah.
So yeah, so that could be the 100K that they're losing here, potentially. So Layla, if that is a situation, yeah, and you know, if you don't go through with the sale and you've signed a promissory note, you will lose that money. That's how it works here. So I get that might be it. Although it might sound also a little bit like, I mean, and you might want to talk yourself after we've finished the recording here, and we can talk directly to Pieter. But it might be some strange quirk of a property developer, because sometimes the property developers have strange packages and requirements, don't they, when they're doing new builds and selling off plan?
Yeah, well, what we see there is kind of a payment. Imagine you buy a property in Braga, for example. The price is 400K, and of course, to make a reservation, you need to put down 5 or 10%, which is completely normal. And then, depending on the stage of the construction, you have to also increase this down payment by another 10% or 20% or whatsoever. But this is not a problem at all, as long as it's written in a decent contract.
Yeah, yeah.
And there is, of course, one kind of issue here. If, for example, the developer, for whatever reason, isn't able to finish the construction. So that's something you definitely need to look into with a good lawyer.
Okay, Layla, maybe you can tell us more after we finish the recording this evening.
Sure.
Questions then about rentals and buying in Portugal. Anything you like. It's a rental and buying in Portugal clinic this evening. Q&A, ask anything you'd like to ask here, please, in the chat. And Pieter, do you provide, ask Denise, long-term services for long-term rentals? Basically, do you do property management as well for people once you've found them a place?
How do you mean?
Let's say one of the propositions that we heard about earlier on, people are buying a house and then they're making it into a rental. Would you oversee that for them if they're not in the country, for example?
No, but what we do there is we can point people into the direction of company or services that do this. It's not the Portugal company itself, but we work with a couple of services and agents in our network that can take that up.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, Michael, is it reasonable to think that if my wife and I were to buy an apartment in Porto, I think this is the same sort of idea that we heard about before, with the hope of occupying permanently in about 2 years' time, that we might be able to Airbnb the place to cover our mortgage over that time? Or would it be more realistic to rent it out on a long-term basis? That is a great question. Maybe a little bit of crystal ball territory as well. But what would you say to somebody who's weighing up? Should I go AL or Airbnb, or should I go for a long-term rental on this?
I would advise to go for the long-term rental because of a couple of issues. Not sure, of course, where this apartment building is in Porto, but also in Porto, there's a lot of issues with issuing AL licenses, the Allogement Local license.
Yeah.
So there you might not get it. So that's the first thing. And long term is a bit more, how can I say, is a bit more safe also for your property itself. You, of course, will not get the same amount, or the market price for short-term rental per night is, of course, a bit higher. But it also, gets a lot of traffic from a lot of tourists for 3, 4, 5 nights. So you also have a lot of additional costs here when it comes to checking people in, especially if you're living abroad. You can't do that yourself. You need to hire this agency. Whereas if you go for the long-term rental option, things are more quiet. It's more easy to get one of the neighbors involved or one of the locals involved to do the check-in and so on. And of course, people that are living for 6 or 12 months in a house, they are behaving a bit better, so to say,
Yes.
than just tourists coming for 3 or 4 nights.
You would hope so, wouldn't you? Okay, so I hope that helps, Mike.
Most of them.
Indeed. Okay. Let's move on then to remodeling and renovation, which must come up a lot for you when you're helping people, whether to buy something finished so they save themselves a massive headache, or whether to go into a dream home renovation. Charlotte's asked a particular question. Several ruins are being renovated near me. I noticed that often they leave part of the old ruin visible. Is that because they need to prove at some point that it was a ruin for tax purposes? And does renovating a ruin provide tax benefits? So is it a good thing to look at from the point of view of managing your money effectively? And then more broadly, do you recommend that people get involved in big renovations, or is that a massive headache here?
Well, I'm not saying it's a massive headache, but it can be, of course. So first, the other question on the
Benefits.
tax benefits. Yes, there are tax benefits, so it's always good to inform, because these are really local benefits, depending on the regions, the lower dense areas. Really want to attract a lot of newcomers with those tax benefits. So there, definitely, it's something you need to look into. If it's a headache, well, some people love it. They really first want to live for 6 or even 12 months in a van or whatsoever, which is perfectly fine. But you really need to ask yourself, is it something you really want to do? And if the answer is yes, then it's not a massive headache. But we also have a lot of clients, they say, no, we really want a recent or a new built property. We don't want to get involved with a construction company, which then every 2 or whatever, every couple of weeks comes up with increasing building supplies and whatsoever, or a shortage of people, which is all gonna happen, of course. But again, if this is really your adventure to rebuild the ruin in the middle of Portugal, then it's fine. But it's something.
Be prepared for that, and all that might bring. And also, I think it's quite important, Peter, isn't it, that both people in the partnership want to do that, because that can cause a bit of trouble, can't it? If only one of them has this dream and the other one doesn't.
Yeah, I think, let's be honest, we are always very optimistic as people. So we always tell ourselves, this will be maybe 3 months, maybe 6, but then,
a lick of paint and it'll be fine. Yes. It's okay.
So that's definitely something.
Prepare yourselves, folks, and have very straightforward and honest conversations with each other if you're entering into that as a partnership as well, about your needs and expectations in such a process. Brilliant. And the other thing, of course, with the tax benefits, keep those receipts. They must have a NIF number on. They must be an official invoice for tax purposes. You can't have a piece of paper where the local builder has just written a number on it, can you?
No, it should be well documented. Let me put it like that.
That's the right way of saying it. Okay. Well documented, a paper trail there. Fantastic. Okay, I hope that helps Charlotte with you and with anyone else thinking of remodeling. Great question from Eric. Good evening to you, Eric. Peter, in your opinion, as the world economy slows down, I think it's fairly safe to say that's what we're dealing with right now. Do you think there is any chance of apartment rental prices coming down in the next year or so? I know that's crystal ball, but what's your feeling about this? Who swims in this water every day?
Yeah, I think we are looking into this this question for a couple of years now, and of course, right now we are really facing an upcoming crisis. But let's be honest. 2 years ago, in the middle of COVID, everyone thought, "Hey, now this bell will explode, and the real estate prices in Portugal, they will completely come down." I don't think so. I think they are still, and of course there are things that are very expensive and that are very cheap. But in general, on average, if you compare it with other countries in the south of Europe or a bit more to the north, the quality of the prices is still very reasonable, and the demand. I mean, let's be very honest. It's a small country with a relatively small real estate market, and the demand is increasing. So if I was in the shoes of a developer, or if I had to sell my own property, I also would aim for a higher price, right? And the market will always tell you if it's right or not. But I don't foresee a big correction for the rest of this year. What you will see is an increase in prices when it comes to construction companies, when it comes to building materials, and of course the interest rate is steadily but surely increasing for a mortgage. But I don't foresee a big correction in the real estate prices themselves.
There you go, Eric. Okay, not yet. And let's go back. We dealt partly with the renovation and remodeling from the human aspect and taking that on. If I could draw you a little bit towards this assessment of some of the better, and okay, we won't do a top 10, but we didn't talk much about the permits and the licensing. So if I could put it this way, where are you most happy talking in Portugal to cameras when it comes to license and permits for renovation and building?
In general, I think it's really fair to say that the smaller town halls are more flexible, are more willing to go the extra step because whatever you need. Whereas the bigger ones, Porto, Lisbon, you're just one of the many people that are knocking on the door to get a license or to get a document or to get whatever you need. So the flexibility inland in lower dense areas is way bigger. Not only inland, also if you look, for example, at the Costa Prata, the Silver Coast, which is relatively close to Lisbon. There we work together with a couple of partners. They are involved in new developments, and things are way more easy than in the bigger cities. So it's not a top 10 or whatsoever, but I think it's fair to say, Porto and Lisbon are making things more complicated. But hey, again, if you're looking for an apartment or for your new place to be in Portugal, in the center of Lisbon, then that's something you need to take into account. And it can take a bit longer, but I really don't see it as a criteria not to go to the historic center of Porto or of Lisbon.
Well, that's good. So not prohibitive, basically. You just need to be aware of what you're up against.
They are less flexible, so you really need to take into account a couple of extra months for these bureaucratic things. But I mean, most of the people we work with, they are really sure if they want to buy in big cities like Porto and Lisbon. So then it doesn't matter. It's just a matter of fact, and you have to wait a bit.
And there are some places, some cameras that are actually raising the bar for themselves at the moment, aren't they? And shaking off this bureaucratic image, I think. There's some notable exceptions. Possibly Fundão is one of those. They're very interested in inward investment, and they understand how important it is to work with people. Silver Coast, I think Alcobaça has something of a reputation for this as well. And next time you're on the Silver Coast talking to those partners, Pieter, we must have lunch. But I think, is it true to say Alcobaça, Fundão, and the likes of those? I mean, don't take us literally on that. These are just sort of indicative from anecdotes. But there are some cameras now that are saying we want this inward investment from foreigners, and they're being a bit more proactive rather than being bureaucratic, just out of habit.
Yeah, definitely. They even have dedicated professionals working at the town hall, and don't expect miracles there, but because it's a law, and of course people have to do it right. But No, definitely. What we see is the smaller villages like Nazaré. Tomorrow, by the way, we are in Nazaré. It's close
Excellent.
to you, right?
Okay, yeah.
And yeah, there it's flexible. Of course, it also the license doesn't come in a week or so, but it's completely different from Lisbon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Switched on. Excellent. Good stuff. Okay. So for the purposes of the recording, I'd like to finish or conclude for the time being with your tips for great places, because this is what we like to ask you. You have a great working knowledge of all the fabulous places that people might like to look at. Some known, some unknown. What's come onto your radar recently that you're willing to share? Alcachet, you were mentioning there. We had a question that came from our forum at expatsportugal.com/community asking about Peniche. What's your view on Peniche? What other places are you looking at the moment that you would recommend to people?
Yeah, what I'm always interested in is very authentic Portuguese villages or small cities,
Yeah.
close to a major city. So easy to go for shopping, culture, close to or relatively close to an international airport. So indeed, Peniche, Silver Coast, Nazaré, these are very authentic Portuguese places where quality of life is well, it's very good, it's very beautiful. And if you need, for whatever reason, maybe for kids that are studying, or maybe you still need to fly in and out every couple of weeks, you need to be close to an international airport. It's cool. It's very, very accessible. Alcochete indeed is one of those things. We were looking for ourselves to buy an apartment in Lisbon, because when I moved from the Netherlands to Portugal in '98, I fell in love with Lisbon. I'm still in love with Lisbon, but I also have a bit of a love-hate relation with it, if you know what I mean. It's very busy, the bureaucracy is killing, and so on. So you also can opt to buy or to live close to Lisbon in something which is still very authentic. And then if I need to be in Lisbon later tonight or tomorrow morning, it's 25-minute drive and I'm in the airport. But if I walk out of my doorstep tomorrow morning with the dog on my flip-flops, I'm like, oh, okay, this is Portugal. This is the river or the sea. That's what I think people, are tempted by when they are thinking of moving from wherever they're from to Portugal, right?
I love that formula. Best of both worlds then. Traditional Portuguese vibes, but handy for a major center with the sort of facilities people might want and have got used to in their life previously.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so get in touch with Pieter Van Nuenen, the Portugal Company, in our business directory at expatsportugal.com. We'll pause the recording there because we need to talk about septic tanks now and resolve some of the other issues that came up a little bit earlier on in a more personal Q&A session. So for the recording thus far, thank you very much, Pieter. Been great talking to you again.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you for having me, and very welcome to continue to ask or to answer questions. And if anything, whatever, please send me an email or reach out via the platform of Expats Portugal. Happy to work.
Thank you very much.